Alright, I think I'm back, and yes, there it goes. Hello, this is Kara Dreamer, back with Saturday morning fanfic story reading, and it's actually Saturday morning, or, no, sorry, it isn't Saturday morning, it's Friday morning. Good lord. Anyway, yeah, they changed my work schedule up, and I haven't quite gotten used to it. And so this would be my Saturday, kind of, since I'm used to coming home on the night, coming home like Friday morning, sleeping, and then having like a little bit of Friday, and then finally my first real weekend day is Saturday, but it's actually Friday. So, yeah, okay. Alright, so it's not Saturday, it's Friday, but here's the fanfic anyway. I have two pieces I'm planning on reading. Both a bit longer than the ones that I read last time. The first is the continuation of Wordbending's Her Universe series of stories about a trans version of Steven and her adventures with her girlfriend Connie. And this one is a little collection called I'm Here. The summary reads: 3 times Steven and Connie were hurt or afraid. 3 times they saved each other. And 3 sets of kisses between 2 worried girlfriends. Aww. Notes. This fic takes place after Her Universe. That would be the basically the first story that Wordbending wrote in this series, although not the first one chronologically in the series. She assures us, however, that reading this is not required to understand this, except to know that Steven is trans. And that also means, as always, it unofficially takes place in the same AU as Nagging Gargoyles series Equilibrium. Alright, and with that short prologue, I will start reading I Am Here by Wordbending. "Are you two prepared?" said Pearl, more than a hint of anxiety in her voice. Connie, in her Kalari training uniform, and Steven in her usual t-shirt and blue shorts, looked towards each other. Connie held out Rose's sword in front of herself in both hands, while Steven formed her shield. They both swallowed. Pearl was carrying a human first aid kit. Not that they needed it, since Steven could heal any injuries that might occur, and not that she entirely understood how to use it, but she figured it never hurt to be prepared. "Ready," said Connie. "Yep," said Steven. "All right," Pearl replied. "Bow." Connie lowered her sword and, closing her eyes, lowered herself into a practiced bow. Steven faced Connie and repeated the gesture a little more awkwardly, even though they'd done this many, many times. "Do it for her," Connie said to herself. Steven hummed a song, quietly repeating to herself, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." "And," said Pearl, raising her hand. After a moment's pause, she swung it downwards. "Begin!" Without a sound, Connie charged, leaping into the air with the sword held high, the blade glinting in the sunlight. She brought it down at Steven's head, but as she expected, Steven was quick to bring up her shield and block the blow. Connie landed on top of the shield, bending down into a crouch, before bouncing off its surface and over Steven's head, bringing the sword down behind her. Again, Steven blocked. Again, Connie swung. She weaved and rolled, trying her best to catch Stephen off guard, but Stephen was always ready for her, her eyes locked on Connie every second. "Parry her, Stephen!" Pearl shouted. "You can do it!" Stephen nodded. The next time Connie swung, Stephen reflected the blow, swinging her shield out in front of herself to catch the sword and deflect its momentum outward. Connie stumbled backwards, but she quickly caught herself and grinned before leaping right back into action with another swing. Eventually, the mid-afternoon sun started to sink in the sky. Before they knew it, it was approaching the horizon, streaking it with golds and purples. Connie was drenched in sweat. She winced, her legs wobbling a little as she stood. Stephen barely looked exhausted at all, although she was starting to breathe heavily. Connie thought she had incredible strength and endurance, even considering she was half gem. "Want to take a break, Connie?" Stephen asked. "It's okay if you do. I don't mind." Connie wiped her mouth with her free hand. "Nah." Stephen looked unsure. "Well, okay, if you're sure. We should get dinner soon, though." Pearl clapped her hands, walking towards them. "Well, in the meantime, I'd like us to try something a little different. Stephen, have you been practicing your shield throws?" Stephen nodded. "Yeah." "And Connie, you've been doing your blocking and guarding exercises, right?" Connie took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah." Pearl smiled. "Excellent. Well, if we're facing corrupted gems, one of the things you're going to have to deal with is enemy projectiles. You have to be ready at any time, at any range." She clenched her fist dramatically. "For an attack." "You want me to throw my shield at Connie?" Stephen asked, sliding her hands down her cheeks. "Very good, Stephen. That's exactly what I'd like you to do." "Can't we just use tennis balls or something?" "Now, Stephen," Pearl explained, "this is also, what do you call it?" "That's right, a trust exercise. You have to be in perfect sync with one another, fused or unfused, and that means absolute trust in one another. A belief that the both of you will not only keep each other safe from harm, but that you can both act together as one." Stephen looked towards Connie, who clutched a hand to her chest, breathing deeply. She frowned. "Of course, I wouldn't force you to do anything you don't want to do," Pearl went on, before looking towards Connie. "Either of you. If you feel you aren't up to the task..." "No," Connie said, shaking her head. "I am up to it." "Connie," Stephen said desperately, "are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Then I'll need the two of you to stand about, 7 or 8 meters apart." What's that in feet?" asked Stephen blankly. "A little over 20, Connie answered instantly before walking off away from Stephen. Stephen followed suit, although she continued to look back behind herself at Connie. "Perfect!" Pearl shouted when they were far enough apart, waving her hand in the air. They weren't quite on opposite sides of the arena, but there was plenty of distance between them, enough that they'd have to raise their voices to hear one another. "Are you two ready?" asked Pearl. "Ready!" Connie shouted. "I guess so," said Stephen, shrugging. "Stephen!" Connie complained, cupping her hands over her mouth. "I mean, yeah. Ready. I trust you, Connie." "Very well," said Pearl, raising her hand. "Now, bow." They bowed to each other. Pearl brought her hand down. "And begin!" Stephen formed her shield. Connie took a sharp breath and, once again, set herself into a combat stance, Rose's huge sword held in front of her with both hands. She lifted it in front of herself, the flat edge facing Stephen, to prepare to block. It wasn't that different, she figured, than blocking tennis balls was. It'd just be bigger and pinker. "Okay, Connie, here I go," Stephen shouted, pulling the shield back like a frisbee. She took a step forward, pulling it further and further back behind herself. 1, 2, 3. She let it go. The shield flew. It spun through the air with a lightness that could only come from a gem weapon, barely seeming to be affected by gravity or wind. It spun towards Connie, who raised her sword higher up, judging the shield's direction and angle, until Connie suddenly stumbled, losing her footing. She dropped the sword. Stephen gasped, but she didn't have time to dissipate the shield before it was too late. The shield knocked onto Connie's head with a heavy clonk, and, before it vanished into thin air, bounced off her skull and went sailing into the sky. Connie was knocked backwards as if she'd been hit by a baseball. Her head reeled back first, then the rest of her, and then she was falling, until she crashed onto the arena floor, sending a plume of dust into the air. Stephen and Pearl were at her side in a moment. Stephen picked her up and cradled her in her arms, but Connie's eyes remained closed. He gave her a small shake, but she didn't respond. There was a bruise and a small cut which was starting to bleed on her forehead. I knew it. I knew this was a bad idea. I knew it, Stephen muttered, hugging her tightly as thick, heavy tears started to roll down her cheeks. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Is she okay? Stephen, I'm so sorry, Pearl repeated over and over. Slowly, however, Connie started to open her eyes, blinking. She groaned. Stephen took one look at her and kissed her on the lips. Connie's brown cheeks darkened. Stephen's face turned bright red, but Stephen didn't stop. He just kissed her harder, deeper. She pulled Connie as tightly to herself as she could, her arms wrapped around her shoulders. It wasn't a great kiss. It wasn't even a good kiss. Stephen's face was wet with tears and snot, and it was hard to avoid bumping foreheads with Connie's bruise. But what she was feeling right then was so intense she couldn't possibly stop. When Stephen finally did break the kiss, she did it with the widest, wobbliest smile on her face. She hadn't cried so hard since she thought she wouldn't be able to be friends with Connie anymore. But this time, she was happy. She was so happy. "Ow," said Connie, reaching up and gingerly touching the bruise on her forehead. "Oh yeah, sorry," said Stephen. Without a moment's hesitation, she started to kiss Connie's forehead, planting kisses on the bruise, on the cut. Instantly, the bruise started to disappear, turning from a dark red back to her skin's shade of brown, and the cut simply vanished as if it had never been there. Connie started to giggle. "Ahem," said Pearl's voice, leaning over them. Stephen and Connie both looked at her, startled, as if they'd forgotten she was there. They blushed deeply, or rather, deeper. Pearl was blushing too, but there was a sly smile on her face. "I, have first aid," she said, holding up the kit. "We don't still need it, do we?" "No, we're good," said Connie, blinking up at her. "Very well," said Pearl, still smiling. "I'm glad you're all right, Connie. Stephen." "Thanks, Pearl." "Well, now that excitement's over," Pearl continued, clapping her hands, "I think we should all be getting to the warp pad." Stephen nodded and begrudgingly let Connie separate herself from her and get to her feet. The three of them started to walk out of the arena and back towards the warp pad, back towards the temple. The entire walk, Pearl hummed to herself. Even when they got back to the temple, and a still blushing Connie waved goodbye and started to walk home, Pearl continued humming and smiling. She kept doing it, even while she cleaned the house. Stephen spent the entire rest of the day on her bed, with her head buried in her hands, groaning. It wasn't their first solo mission. Not even close. They weren't kids anymore. They were teens. They could handle themselves. The other gems knew that too. They were sure. And after everything they'd faced dealing with Homeworld, any mission at this point should have been as easy as pie. But it was still a disaster. While Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl had been tracking one of the remaining corrupted gems into an ancient gem ruin, Stephen and Connie had tracked a corrupted gem of their own, deep into a jungle. They'd never been on a jungle mission before, but Stephen had assured her it would be fine, in spite of all of the panthers and vampire bats and every other animal Connie had read might be in them. After all, as Stephen reminded her, Stephen had once been trapped on a deserted island for a month. But they had gotten off the path and had ended up deep, deep in the jungle, far away from the warp pad. They were lost, and they'd realized something. They weren't hunting the corrupted gem anymore. They'd heard her shuffling around, not just around them, but above them, shaking the trees and sending their leaves to the ground. She was hunting them. They'd quickly fused, forming Stephen's shield and taking out Rosa's sword in preparation for an attack, but they'd misjudged. The shaking leaves and branches made them think the gem would be coming from above. Instead, she came from their side, bursting out of the trees with a roar. Her long, sharp fangs gleamed, saliva flying in front of her. She was shaped somewhat like a giant gorilla, hunched forward on two of her large forearms, but she wasn't like any gorilla they'd seen at a zoo. The red skin, the lack of fur anywhere but her head, was one giveaway. The black crystalline spikes all across her arms and torso were another, as were the 6 eyes. The fact that she had 4 arms, not 2, was definitely one of the biggest and the most dangerous. Stevani quickly pulled the shield in front of themselves to block as the gem swung 2 massive left arms out at them, but they haven't accounted for the other set of arms. The arms came round from the other side, slamming into them. Instantly, the left set of arms closed around them too, crushing them into a bear hug. Stevani didn't even struggle. They only gave the gem a pained grin. "Big mistake," they said, before they slammed one bare foot into her chest. The gem roared, startled more than hurt, but the grip of her arms loosened, and that was enough. Pouncing at the opportunity, Stevani broke free of her grip and bounded off her chest, flipping backwards into the air. Then they brought down Rosa's sword, Stephen's sword, their sword, right through her head, the blade crossing past her 6 eyes. The corrupted gem exploded into a huge puff of smoke, sending a red ruby gem falling to the ground. The force of the explosion knocked Stevani out of the air. With a cry, they flew backwards. Even before they hit the ground, it started. There was a shing sound and a flash of light that surrounded their body. It was followed by a feeling of 2 minds, previously in perfect sync, closer than close, being forcefully yanked apart. 2 bodies, not one, crashed into the ground, sliding through a mud puddle. Bugs scattered underfoot. Connie groaned and lifted herself off the ground, wincing and holding her forehead. Immediately, she looked to Stephen, but Stephen was merely laying in the mud puddle, face down. A jolt of fear coursed through Connie's body. She scrambled to her feet, quickly rushing over to Stephen's side. When she reached Stephen, she lifted her off the ground. Her face was covered in mud, and her eyes were closed, but there was no blood, no sign of injury. She breathed a sigh of relief. With her clean sleeve, she started to wipe the mud off Stephen's face. She winced, but it wasn't like the rest of her clothes were any less muddy or torn. Her mother was just going to have to deal with yet another ruined set. Slowly, as Connie continued to wipe the mud off, Stephen blinked, her eyes flickering open. Instantly, before she'd even thought about it, Connie shut her eyes tight, wrapped her arms around Stephen's shoulders, and pulled her into a kiss. Connie could feel the mud on both their skins, could practically taste the mud on Stephen's lips, and she'd started to cry. But she couldn't bring herself to care, not one bit. Stephen's eyes were wide open now. She wasn't kissing Connie back, so Connie did all the work, letting herself sink deeper and deeper into the kiss, laying more and more against Stephen's bulky chest, her big stomach. She felt as Stephen's huge arms slowly started to wrap back around her, as if she was unsure what to do, but just wanted to hold her tightly. Suddenly, Stephen broke off the kiss, pulling away. She shook her head, her long, dark brown ringlets shaking back and forth. "Connie!" she practically shouted. "Connie, you're okay!" And now Stephen was kissing her on the forehead. Over and over, she pressed kisses to it, holding Connie's cheeks in her mud-covered hands. Connie broke into giggles. "Stephen," she faux complained, playfully pushing Stephen away. Stephen was undeterred. "You're getting mud all over me." Stephen laughed and chuckled. "Sorry, Connie, couldn't help it," she said, sing-song. "Get over here, you doofus," Connie replied, smiling up at her. She grabbed Stephen by the shirt collar and pulled her down until she was laying flat in the mud puddle, and Stephen was right on top of her. Stephen blushed a deep shade of crimson, but Connie could literally see the stars in her eyes. Shouldn't we bubble that gem and go home first?" Stephen said, collecting herself. "It's gross out here. There's like bugs." Connie leaned up and kissed her again. "Nope." Stephen shrugged. Good enough for her. Connie pulled her tightly to herself, face to face, chest to chest. She could have just laid like there. She could have just laid there like that forever. The comforting warmth of Stephen's gem against her stomach, but, well, there was kissing to be done. Oh, a song. I never know the tunes to these things. I've got a girl, and she holds me so tight. Stephen did nothing less than vogue. She swung her head back, letting her massive mane of pink ringlets fly backwards behind her, and she gave the audience the most sizzling stare she could muster. A gray-haired Greg, standing behind her in a pair of sunglasses, wailed on his guitar. A much older, stubbled sour cream adjusted knobs and dials on his turntable. Connie, the one audience member, clapped in time with the rhythm. I've got a girl, and it's... Stephen's voice went suddenly cold, and the music, backing track, Greg's guitar, everything, went cold with it. The microphone let out a screech as Stephen, staring out towards the beach, lowered it towards the ground. And before any of them could react, she turned and ran. "Whoa," said Greg, raising his sunglasses as Stephen rushed past him and through the curtains leading backstage. Connie was on her feet in a moment. She bolted towards the stage, quickly climbing up it instead of even bothering to go around and take the stairs. She pushed her way past the curtains, hoping to catch Stephen. She found... She found Stephen throwing up into a garbage can, looking utterly miserable. Her beautiful ensemble, the purple dress, covered in white gemstones that Bismuth had handcrafted, was likely getting ruined. Her makeup certainly was. Connie winced. "Stephen?" Stephen looked up from the garbage can, startled. She turned towards Connie, quickly wiping her mouth. Red lipstick came off with it. "Connie, sorry about that. I'm fine," she said quickly, but Connie heard her sniffle. Connie quickly closed the distance between them, putting her hands on Stephen's shoulders. "Stephen, you're not fine." Stephen frowned. Connie, I'm fine. Really. But she couldn't keep it up. Her composure broke. Her face crumpled. Huge tears started to fill her eyes. Connie pulled her against her shoulder, wrapping her arms around Stephen's torso, and Stephen started to weep, openly, loudly. "Stephen," she said, patting her on the back. "It's okay. I'm here." I can't do it, Connie," Stephen blubbered. Suddenly, Connie felt a pair of arms around her, and then she was being crushed against Stephen's chest. She let out a surprised pain. "Oof. Oh, I'm scared. I'm really scared." "But the audience loves you. You're my audience. And I love you." Stephen squeezed her tighter. Connie was surprised she could still breathe. "Isn't that all that matters?" Connie felt Stephen nod rapidly. "Let's sit down," Connie offered. "Okay?" She felt Stephen nod again. Stephen released her from her iron grip, and Connie gratefully took the opportunity to sit down, legs crossed, on the floor. Stephen practically collapsed onto it, sitting down all at once. She stared down at the ground, looking barely reassured at all. Connie's heart sank. "I know it's scary, but it's just rehearsal, Stephen," Connie tried, reaching out and pressing her hand to Stephen's cheek against her beard. "It's gonna be okay." That's exactly it," Stephen sighed, but she leaned against Connie's hand. Connie felt the comforting warmth of her cheek underneath the tear stains. If I can't handle rehearsal..." "You can," Connie said firmly. "You're the bravest, strongest girl I've ever met." Stephen smiled. "You're the bravest, strongest girl I've ever met. And that's why we're perfect for each other." Stephen laughed, a low chuckle. "Remember what Garnet told us?" Stephen nodded. She didn't have to repeat the lyrics. They had both had them memorized so deeply into their subconscious that it was like a second skin. "Well, I'm here for you," Connie continued. "And I always will be, whether it's Earth-threatening alien invasions or singing pop songs or whatever other scary stuff you get into, okay?" Stephen nodded rapidly. "Okay. Any better?" Stephen nodded again. You better not just be telling me that, Connie's teased. I'll know. A small smile crossed Stephen's tear-stained face. I'm not. It really did help. Thanks, Connie. Putting her hands on Stephen's shoulders and leaning forward, Connie planted a kiss on Stephen's forehead. Stephen giggled. I love you. Stephen. Excuse me. I love you, Stephen said. It sounded like it was as much to herself as to Connie. Connie only kissed her again. Leaning down, she pressed a kiss to Stephen's lips, letting it linger for a moment before pulling away. I love you too, she said, and I always, always will. Can we just... Stephen asked, a blissful smile on her face. Connie kissed her again. She couldn't help herself. Can we just stay like this forever? Nah, Connie said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She was so close to Stephen's ear. Her hand stayed on Stephen's cheek, brushing her beard. We've got to go fix your makeup. Aww. And then you're going to sing to me. Just me. By myself. No stage. Does that sound good? That sounds nice. But I guess we could just stay like this first, for a few minutes. Stephen grinned. That sounds even better. Behind them, Greg and Sour Cream stared. Sour Cream looked to Greg and shrugged. Greg merely grinned, shrugging back. Let's leave the two lovebirds to it, he said, motioning over his shoulder with his thumb before walking back through the curtain to the front of the stage. And that is the end. The final notes read simply, thanks to my friends Ivy and Skirmisher2148 for taking a look at this fic. Just a second here. Alright, sorry. Anyway. Alright. Sorry, I just had to talk with someone for a few minutes. And now that I'm done with Steven Universe, it's on to Undertale. With a story that I wrote. I've written a bit of Undertale fanfic. I haven't done it for a bit. I've been kind of meaning to get back into it, but God, I got so many things. I've also found kind of other ways to start getting the Undertale-related creative urge satisfied here and there with like Mastodon and sort of talking on Discord with people. I still would really like. I've got lots of fanfic ideas still, but yeah, like I mean, when I finished playing Undertale for the first time back in 2016, now the middle of 2016, I went through a huge creative burst, and probably wrote in the space of 6 months or so, maybe, about, I don't know, at least 100,000 words all told. Finishing some stories, not finishing others. I feel bad about having unfinished stuff left over, of course, and keep thinking about going back and working on stuff again, but who knows? One of the reasons that I started doing these fanfic readings was that I was kind of hoping that getting back into reading fanfic would inspire me back into writing more of it. Well, we'll see whether that works. Just the experience of broadcasting alone is kind of satisfying in a way that that I feel like I'm adding to the community, to this kind of to the culture and meaning surrounding this game that has done so much for me, that I'm figuring out other ways to contribute to that maybe don't make having to write so necessary a thing anymore. That's a thing that happens. So anyway, but enough on that rumination. Let's get to the actual story. This is a short piece based off of an exchange that happens in the game. It's an optional thing. You'd only see it if you regularly called up Papyrus and Undyne on the phone after you have your date with Undyne and you become great friends. And let me see if I could find a screenshot of the moment. Yeah, I think I found it actually. Maybe. I sort of did. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. This is it. This is it. Copy image address. Okay. So to OBS, browser source. Okay. I'll just leave that up there as I read because it's appropriate. It's when if you get to the place where you do the little play with Metaton still in sexy rectangle form, and he's singing that ridiculous love song to the tune of da, 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 da. And so then if you call Papyrus and Undyne after that, you get this exchange, I can't believe you got to dance with Metaton, because after all, Papyrus is a big fan and eventual lover, ha ha ha. And Undyne's all, big deal, earlier the human and I danced with Death. Wow, is Death cool? Yeah, she's like super hot. I want to meet Death. Now, the moment I saw that for the first time, I just thought immediately of Death from Sandman, from Neil Gaiman's Sandman, a comic that I read when it came out back in the 90s. And then it got spun off into there's Death, the High Cost of Living miniseries, and then I think there's been other spin-off properties, I'm sure. And well, I might as well just put a picture of her up as well. I think most people are going to know exactly who I'm talking about, though, because she's pretty well known in pop culture these days. and I mean, basically, it's like Death looking like hot goth girl, and you know, like it's kind of silly, but I used to feel a bit self-conscious about liking her. You know, like it felt kind of, I don't know, teenage boy, immature. God, it's there's so many picks to choose from. Let's do. This is a good one. Yeah. Okay, another browser source. And I'll put in the this is not a pick from a Neil Gaiman comic. It's off of DeviantArt actually, and so I'll be okay. Looks like that's gonna kind of do as a way to have both of them up. And yeah, that is credited to Elizabeth on DeviantArt, and I'll put the link to it in the show notes once I'm done recording. So yeah, like I ain't using no uncredited art here. But yeah, so that's Neil Gaiman's Death for you, and she's, you know, this dark-haired gothy chick, and so, you know, it sort of perfectly made sense that when Undyne was, who's, you know, lesbian as shit, is totally gonna think that Death is like is hot and would like hit on her and stuff. And well, you know, a little sometime later I thought, you know, I could actually write a story like this. Like, it was like 2 in the morning. I was trying to sleep. I remember I was downstairs on the couch because like my girlfriend was snoring kind of loud, if I recall correctly, and I was sort of like, oh, I got to sleep somewhere else. It's, you know, I've gotten kind of this is a situation that's improved, by the way. So anyway, so yeah, I was lying downstairs and, you know, on the couch and not sleeping and thinking about stuff, and just started working on this, and had like most of a rough draft done before the end of the night, as I recall. It took a little time later to polish it up a bit, and kind of made a few minor emendations when I posted the story to Archive of Our Own first, but then the slightly different version that I'm about to read to you is posted on my DeviantArt. Unfortunately, I've got like stuff scattered over the internet in various stages of like, you know, not quite being consistent and stuff like that, and I have to do something about that, like find new hosting and things. Anyway, so this is my Undertale / Neil Gaiman's Sandman / Death crossover. Death versus the Undying. Come back here, you little punk! Undyne, captain of the Royal Guard of the Kingdom of the Monsters, stampeded after the fleeing human over the bridge leading into the sweltering, steaming atmosphere of Hotland. Red mist gathered at the edges of her vision. Her mouth gaped and her chest heaved, panting desperately to overcome the dead weight of fatigue that was forcing the weary guard captain to her knees, mere yards from her prey. Armor so hot, she murmured through lips cracked and parched in the burning, shimmering heat. Undyne was almost to the edge of the bridge when the toe of one of her boots found an unexpectedly large space between 2 of its slats, and she tripped and fell with a crash. Still, her claws scrabbled over the boards underneath her as she pulled herself towards the spry figure of the brown-haired human who remained just beyond her reach, dancing infuriatingly ahead of her into the inferno of Hotland. The mist swirled thicker about her failing vision. If Undyne could just make it another 5 yards, she'd reach her darling Alphys's gift to her, and she'd be as fresh as ever. The human looked uncomfortable too, sweat streaming down their dark-complexioned face and dripping off the ends of their long hair. But the dark eyes remained fixed on Undyne, wide with... "No, stop it," she ordered herself. "Don't falter because they're looking at you that way. Don't waver because they're telling you they don't want to fight. It's got to be a trick." The thought spurred her to fresh effort, and she hauled herself forward toward the human another few yards, but it was like crawling a few yards further into a blast furnace. The last of her strength and her life were evaporating in the heat. "But I can't," she whispered, one webbed hand reaching towards the maddeningly distant human as if to grasp them by the neck. "I can't give up." Everything went red. Undyne blinked, realizing she was still lying on her face on a bridge in Hotland, and scrambled to her feet, shaking her head to clear it. Everything looked the same as it had a second before. The exasperating human in their stupid purple and blue shirt was still standing there, gawping at her. "What are you staring at, you little punk?" she growled, taking a step towards the human, who did not respond or even move a muscle. With a sudden shock, Undyne realized the human was frozen in mid-movement. One foot still on the ground, the other stretched forward. Their eyes were open even wider, and their face looked shocked. They were reaching towards Undyne with both arms. "Still a human trick," said Undyne to herself, uncertainly, trying to think if any of the human historical documents Alphys screened for her had featured anything like this. Sailor Pluto? She thought. Then how come the human was the one frozen, while she could still move? From the far end of the bridge, which Undyne had crossed, there sounded footsteps coming out of the darkness of waterfall. The soldier's attention snapped immediately into high alert, and she whipped around. Advancing towards the middle of the bridge leading back towards waterfall was what looked like a young human woman with exceedingly pale skin, dressed in black jeans and a black tank top that showed off her lithe figure. The long, unkempt hair that partly screened her face was also black, as were her lips and her heavily shadowed eyes, one of which was framed with an Egyptian-esque tattoo like an Eye of Horus. Reddish light from the magma of Hotland gleamed off the striking contours of her white face and the silver ankh pendant dangling around her neck. Her countenance was neutral, not smiling, but not menacing or sad either. Huh. Not bad. Not bad at all, Undyne permitted herself to think. Way different from Alfie's style, but not bad. Hey there, Undyne, said the woman, stopping perhaps 20 yards from the guard captain. Got a second to talk? Hey there. Undyne nodded her head towards the approaching stranger, then gave her a tooth-filled grin and a small toss of her ponytail fin. Normally, I'd be hollering at you to get away from me because I'm in the middle of a fight, but... She glanced back at the human frozen in mid-run with that ridiculous, bug-eyed expression on their face. Seeing as how you're moving and this human ain't, I'm guessing you've got something to do with this. The pale-skinned woman smiled. Something to do with it. Also, you're not really moving either. Look down. Undyne glanced towards her feet and started back involuntarily. Lying there was a tall blue figure in a suit of heavy plate armor. Ah! That's me! I look terrible! Undyne bent down to look at her own face. Her skin was dried out and turning a dull, unhealthy-looking shade, and her tongue was parched and sticking out of her mouth. She looked back up at the woman, comprehension dawning. So, this is it for me, huh? Wow. I didn't think death would come like this. She grinned. Her look as good as you. I'm a little tempted just to go quietly, but... Undyne crouched down in her fighting stance. She held up her hand, and in a moment she was gripping a luminous aquamarine blue spear. I am the captain of the Royal Guard of the Kingdom of the Monsters. I have sworn upon my life to defend my people, my king, and my queen against all invaders, even death herself. Her single eye flickered a little. Even if you are kind of smoking. Death smiled and looked down for a moment. You really are a determined one, aren't you? She said in a voice with a suggestion of laughter just beneath it. Undyne snarled, pointing her spear towards Death. You think that's funny? Death shook her head. No. I've come for a lot of warriors and fighters over the eons, and seen a lot of posturing and bluster, and I'll fight death herself, play acting, but you... She gave Undyne a little salute with 2 fingers to her forehead. I could tell it's the real deal. If I were here for you, I could tell you you'd give me trouble. But I'm not actually here for you, Undyne. You're dying, but you're not going to die. Death's face grew serious, and she pointed past her toward the immobile figure of the human. I'm here for them. The human? Undyne's spear evaporated into the glowing blue smoke, and she looked behind her at the kid. They look fine to me. I'm the one who's turning gray with my tongue stuck out. Doesn't matter. They're about to save you. Undyne's face twisted with scorn. What? This time Death didn't suppress the laugh. Well, I'm not exactly sure they're gonna save you. The universe doesn't work like that, even for me. You know how people think I've got some kind of book that's got all your names written down in it, with a date or something like that, telling them when they're gonna die? She chuckled again. Things are a bit more sophisticated than that. Here, let me show you something. Death held her hands in front of her, spaced several feet apart, and abruptly, the air between her hands shimmered with a vast, branching network, a silvery cloud of thousands, no, millions, uncountable billions of intricate threads and paths, gleaming lines, all connected with one another in an unguessable number of nodes. Some pathways and nodes shone brightly and steadily. Others seemed to flicker on the edge of sight, their visibility shifting and changing whenever the eye was distracted from them. Cool, huh? A bit more complicated than a book, but then, life and death are complicated things. How are you doing that? Undyne asked, her mouth wide with surprise as she stepped towards the shining patterns in the air. Girl, you might not be gonna die today, but right now, well, you are dying. I could put anything in your brain I want to at this point. I admit, most people just get the standard life flashing before their eyes stuff, but, well, your situation's a bit trickier than that. That's why I'm wasting all this time on you. Death twitched a hand, and the phosphorescent line shifted, focusing in on one section of the network that seemed, more than any other part of it that Undyne had glimpsed, to flicker on and off strangely, never when her eye was directly on it. Death pointed towards one node from which huge forests of branching, ever-changing connections sprang, a node whose brightness and position in the network was never the same 2 glances in a row. That's the kid's record you're seeing there. Baffling, isn't it? Pulled in 1,000 different directions, this kid. They just can't seem to settle down and decide what they're gonna do. Whether they're gonna attack or defend. Whether they're gonna be a savior or a killer. Depends on when you look and who's looking. Like Schrodinger's cat. Quantum superposition of states, Undyne murmured. Huh? Death looked at her, surprised. You know about that? Not me, Undyne grinned. My girlfriend, Alfie. She's not really my girlfriend. I mean, she doesn't know she's my girlfriend. That is, I don't know if she knows if... She stuttered to a halt, completely flustered. Death giggled. I know how it is. But anyway, what did Dr. Alphys tell you? Well, said Undyne, collecting herself and sparing only a moment to wonder how the woman knew Alphys's full name and title. Alfie's super smart, and she tried to explain to me once how everything we see at any moment isn't just one thing with one state. It's a combination of many states, all sort of existing like at the same time. And you can't even say for certain where an atom or a particle or how much energy it's got or where it is. Only that it might be here and it might be moving this fast. Undyne scrunched up her face. It's kind of weird. I can't say I fully get it. Death smiled broadly. Not many do. And even your genius lady friend doesn't get the whole picture, I bet. But she's right. Everything in this... She gestured towards the shimmering network of threads. It's both there and it isn't there. It's all a question of probabilities. One chance branches out into a million others. Especially when it comes to them. She pointed at the still, unmoving human. They're a weird one. They don't quite play even by my rules. But one thing I'm pretty certain about is that they're gonna splash some cold water on your face from that thing. Death nodded past her glowing display to the water cooler. Alphys's water cooler. Just barely visible in the distance through the hazy, heat-distorted air. Oh, there's a small probability they won't. But even if they don't, you got a lot of determination, Royal Guard Captain Undyne. Holy crap, have you got a lot of determination. I have an idea you'll pull yourself together and crawl back to safety. Undyne glared at Death, confused. Okay, so you keep saying I'm not gonna die here. Then, why the hell are we having a chat over my unconscious body? 'Cause there's still a pretty good chance that even after this kid dumps cold water on you, you're gonna kill him anyway. And that's a decision that affects a lot more people than you, as it turns out. Undyne growled and clenched her fist. Of course it does! That human soul is all that stands between us monsters and the barrier that keeps us jailed down here. Their death means life and freedom for all of us. Our hearts and our souls are united in this. Even you're not stopping all of us, gorgeous. Death nodded and looked all around her as if to take in the entire underground at a glance. Oh, believe me, I could feel it. I'm not one to stand in the way of anyone's freedom, really, even if it means that 7.5 billion humans die in the process. They're humans! After what they did to us, they deserve it! Undyne snarled. Yeah! Why should you care? Your death. What's a few billion lives, more or less, to you? Death smirked at Undyne. Yeah, I'm Death. And I don't care about human lives one way or another. Well, I shouldn't. Truth to tell, I'm a little sentimental about Earth and its silly, self-important people. I'm a bit fond of a few of them, even. But that's not the main thing. She pointed straight at the human. I told you they were a weird one. You've got so much determination, you'd actually stand a chance of giving me a trouble in a fight. But them? Death's voice sank low indeed, and even in the torrid atmosphere of Hotland, her words chilled the air that Undyne breathed. They've got enough determination to give a whole multiverse trouble. Just a little push, one direction or another. That's all it might take. The grim mood affected Undyne. What do you mean? A whole multiverse? Like, killing this kid will destroy every world ever, somehow? How the hell is that supposed to work? I can't say too much, said Death carefully. But let's just say, you murder this kid after they've helped you. It's not actually gonna stop them. And they'll remember what you did when they come back. That's crap! Undyne's voice was angry and harsh with defiance. Humans can't come back from the dead. Not all humans are the same, Undyne. This one can't just come back from the dead. They could raise you from the dead if they wanted. Well, sort of. They could make it as if you'd never died. Or they can decide that maybe they really want you a corpse, after all. Damn. Undyne took a few steps towards the human, her hand poised as if to summon another spear, but she did not. They're a flipping menace, then. Death grinned in enthusiastic assent. They are. And yet, all they keep saying is that they want to be your friend. Think about that. What? Undyne faltered and dropped her hand back to her side. I don't get it. I told you, Undyne. This kid is getting pulled every which way. They don't even know what's happening, poor guy. They don't even know how powerful they are. But right this second, 1,000 people who do know about this kid's power are poking them, nudging them, whispering silent pleas to them. Mercy! Or fight! Death winced, looking down at the ground for a second, running her hand through her lanky, unkempt hair. I'm not supposed to care, you know, but maybe, just this once, before I have to drag their soul away from their dead body for the zillionth time. I want this kid to get a chance to do what they want to do. And that's to be a kid with friends. Death looked up again and straight into Undyne's face, her dark eyes looking straight through the guard captain and out the other side. Best friends, even. Undyne gritted her teeth. Damn it! You're sounding like freaking papyrus all of a sudden. Why are you telling me this if you're just doing your job one way or the other? Death smiled and walked up to Undyne's side, standing shoulder to shoulder and looking at her with the immobilized human. So close did Death stand that Undyne could feel the light brushing of her hair against the edges of her fins. Maybe I just feel like it. Maybe I just want to avoid work. If, even after everything that they've already gone through, this kid decides that maybe it doesn't pay to be nice after all and goes over to the dark side, well, it'll be a huge goddamn hassle for me. She turned her head to smile her gleaming smile at Undyne, and Undyne grinned back. She really is pretty, the soldier couldn't help but thinking. Not quite my type, but still. Helping people to cross over might just be my job, but it's not necessarily one I always love doing. Who the hell ever likes their job 100% of the time? Undyne nodded, looking over at the diminutive figure of the human and their shocked expression. She flashed back to when she last saw that expression, only minutes before, when the human watched Monster Kid stumble on the bridge and waterfall and almost plunge into the abyss. Undyne sighed. I know I'm not liking my job that much right now. Come to think of it. Death nodded in commiseration. Really, I can't take any sides in this fight, Undyne. You know, though, this is one case where you might want to think for a second or two before acting. Hang on! Are you calling me impulsive? Undyne, I know you're impulsive. Death gave Undyne's biceps a comradely punch. You've almost been mine a couple times, girl. Not as close as today, but close enough for me to take some notice. Not even. I'm tougher than that. Yeah, I know you are. Both of them turned to face and study each other. Death's piercing eyes looked Undyne up and down, sending a not unpleasant shiver through the soldier's nerves. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again, more than once, whatever you decide to do here. Undyne grinned her most threatening grin and raised her arm in a "we can do it" salute. And I'm gonna fight you every time, sweetie. I think I might enjoy that. Death giggled. It's been a while since I've had a fight with someone who really had the right sort of passion in it. Put her there. She raised her own arm in like fashion, with her hand open for Undyne to take. Undyne gripped it and for a few moments they strained against each other's grasp. "Damn," said Undyne, single eye open wide. "You don't look it, a skinny little thing like you, but you got a lot of power in that grip, gorgeous." "Yeah," Death grinned, releasing Undyne from their brief arm wrestle. "Still, you might stand a chance." "Oh, you might let me win, huh?" Undyne said, scowling a little. "Maybe, but really, when it comes to fighting death, is that something to get too picky about?" Undyne barked out a laugh. "Nah, I guess not." Death gave Undyne a jaunty wave and began to stroll away the way she came, toward the eternal twilight of Waterfall. A few paces away, however, she turned for a final word. "You might want to chat with your genius semi-girlfriend, by the way. I think you might learn a lot more than just some quantum mechanics from her." You know Alfie?" Death's expression flickered just a little. "Seen her a couple times." "Oh. Undyne looked down for a second. Thanks for telling me." "Don't mention it. If it makes you feel any better, it might not look it, but she's a fighter too, in a different way." "Yeah." Undyne looked back up again, a fire in her eye. "I know it." "Good. Be seeing you." Death walked off into the gloom and disappeared. Undyne looked back down at her body, still flopped down on the bridge like a beached whale. How was she supposed to do this? "I want back in there," she ordered herself. "Come on, Undyne. You can do this. You're determined." Her vision dimmed again, and she seemed to fall back down to the ground, back into the red mist. Am I dead? She felt through her bones the wonderful sensation of ice-cold water flowing over her scales, and she knew that she was not. And that's the end. Well, that was good. I've never actually... Thank you, Kaylin. My friend Kaylin Evergreen is here. Came in while I was reading. And I'm about to spend my day with her, so I'll say very quickly a few words about this. This is the first time I've ever read my own writing aloud, even for the purpose of proofreading, which is a little embarrassing because I noticed a number of slight mistakes that escaped proofreading. Lesson to myself, don't be so afraid of reading my own writing. Yeah, like, I'm still pretty happy with this story. I don't think I'd actually change all that much. I mean, I've already, give it a poke here and there. I would have changed where I was when doing the broadcast. Like, it only occurred to me halfway through that I should have actually picked a Hotland place to go to for the background music instead of, like Toriel in her chair. Mom, read me the one about death again, which doesn't seem like something that Toriel would read to her child. But anyway, just thanks for listening, those of you who did, and if you didn't, then I hope you might be listening later on YouTube or wherever else I decide to start hosting this stuff. I'm kind of working towards changing how I do these things. I've been trying to keep to a consistent schedule, not succeeding all that well, although at the very least I've been managing to get something read every week. and I try to tell people about the broadcasts and everything, and occasionally people could show up, but a lot of people can't devote that long at even a day's notice to listen to an hour plus of me talking. So I'm going to be moving to a more conventional sort of podcast arrangement where I'm announcing and releasing on a schedule recordings rather than trying to do everything live. However, I'm still going to stick to simply recording a live broadcast, as tempting as it is to do multiple readings and some editing to get out any fluffed lines or ums or ers if I'm doing extemporaneous speaking. As tempting as it is to do that, it's extremely time consuming. I've found that out for myself. I've actually done this just for a short piece, and I just don't want to do that, and I'm willing to trade the energy and convenience of simply doing one live take and putting it up for that convenience, and then I'll be announcing when I'm doing recording sessions, just like I'm doing now, and people can stop in and listen if they like. But the main focus will be simply producing content frequently enough that I can release on a consistent schedule. Anyway, I think that wraps it up for today. This not Saturday morning fanfic, hour and 15 minutes. So, thanks a lot. And I'll see you next week, maybe. This is Kara Dreamer. Stay determined.